A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Well, the day finally came and went, didn't it? February 5th, 2026. That was the official expiration date for the New START Treaty, and for the first time in over 54 years, the two biggest nuclear powers on the planet, the United States and Russia, are operating without any binding, verifiable limits on their strategic arsenals. It is a bit of a sobering thought to start the morning with, but it is the reality we are living in now. The guardrails are gone, the inspectors have gone home, and the era of nuclear transparency has effectively been replaced by a giant question mark.
It really is a massive shift, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have been staring at the satellite imagery and the latest reports from the Federation of American Scientists all week. Our housemate Daniel actually sent us a prompt about this recently, asking us to look at the global intercontinental ballistic missile landscape now that the legal architecture has collapsed. We have moved from a bipolar world of managed competition into this multipolar, unconstrained era where the old rules of the game just do not seem to apply anymore. It is not just about Washington and Moscow anymore. We are looking at a three-body problem with Beijing and a host of regional players who are rapidly closing the technical gap.
Yeah, and it is interesting because just a few weeks ago, we were talking about the Iranian ballistic missile program and how their rhetoric often outpaces their actual reach. But today we are stepping up into the big leagues. We are talking about the true intercontinental ballistic missiles, the ICBMs. These are the ones that can cross oceans, exit the atmosphere, and change the course of human history in under 30 minutes. It is a completely different level of engineering, involving heat shields that can survive re-entry at 20 times the speed of sound and guidance systems that can hit a target the size of a refrigerator from 6,000 miles away.
And I think it is important to start by defining what we actually mean when we say ICBM. In the world of arms control and physics, there is a very specific red line, and that is 5,500 kilometers, or about 3,400 miles. If a missile can travel further than that, it is classified as an intercontinental ballistic missile. Anything less falls into the intermediate or medium range categories. That 5,500 kilometer mark is not arbitrary, by the way. It was originally calculated during the Cold War as the minimum distance needed to hit the contiguous United States from the furthest corners of the Soviet Union, or vice versa. It is the distance that defines a global threat versus a regional one.
Right, so it is the distance that defines the stakes. And when we look at who actually possesses that capability in 2026, it is a much more crowded room than it used to be. We usually talk about the nuclear triad as the gold standard of deterrence. That is the three-legged stool of land-based missiles and silos, submarine-launched missiles, and strategic bombers. The idea is that, even if an enemy wipes out one or two legs in the surprise attack, the third leg can still deliver a devastating counterstrike. But not everyone has the full set, do they?
No, they do not. Only the United States and Russia have maintained a truly robust, diverse triad for decades. China has officially joined that club recently with their massive expansion into new silo fields and their advanced Type 094 and 096 submarine programs. But then you have countries like the United Kingdom and France who have made very different strategic choices. They have essentially put all their eggs in one basket, the sea-based leg. They rely on what is called continuous at-sea deterrence, meaning they always have at least one nuclear-armed submarine hidden somewhere in the deep ocean, ready to respond. They do not have land-based silos anymore because, frankly, in a small country like the UK or France, a silo is just a giant bullseye for an enemy strike.
It is a fascinating strategy because it is purely defensive in its logic. You cannot take out a submarine in a first strike if you cannot find it, so it guarantees a second strike. But what I find interesting about the UK specifically, and we have touched on this before, is how independent that deterrent actually is. Most people do not realize that the British Vanguard class and the newer Dreadnought class submarines carry Trident, two D5 missiles that are technically part of a shared pool with the United States. They are serviced and maintained at Kings Bay, Georgia. So, while the decision to launch is technically a British sovereign choice made by the Prime Minister, the hardware is deeply tethered to American infrastructure. If the US decided to stop servicing those missiles, the UK's nuclear capability would have a very short shelf life.
That is a great point, Corn. It creates this interesting paradox where the UK is a sovereign nuclear power, but their long-term operational capability is functionally linked to their alliance with Washington. France, on the other hand, is much more fiercely independent. They develop their own missiles like the M51.3, and they have a very specific doctrine they call sufficiency, or suffisance in French. Their logic is not about matching an adversary missile for missile. They do not care if Russia has 5,000 warheads. France's logic is, we have just enough to make the cost of attacking France absolutely unacceptable. It is the tear-off and arm strategy. You might destroy us, but you will lose your major cities in the process, and that is enough to keep you from trying.
So it is the difference between having a massive arsenal for every possible scenario and just having a very sharp, very hidden dagger. But let us look at the other side of the ledger, the expanding powers. This is where the post-New START world gets really unpredictable. We have to talk about China. For years, the conventional wisdom was that China maintained a minimal deterrent, maybe 200 to 300 warheads, just enough to ensure they were not bullied. But that is not the case anymore, is it? The satellite data from 2024 and 2025 tells a very different story.
Not even close. If you look at the satellite photos of the Gobi Desert, specifically around Yumen, Hami, and Ordos, you can see hundreds of new missile silos being constructed. We are talking about a massive, rapid expansion that has completely upended the Pentagon's planning. Current estimates suggest China could reach over 1,000 operational warheads by 2030. They are building out their own triad with the DF-41 ICBM, which is a road mobile missile that is incredibly hard to track because it can hide in tunnels or forests. They are also testing hypersonic glide vehicles that can maneuver to avoid US missile defenses.
And this is the core of the trilateral deadlock we are seeing in 2026. The United States is looking at this growth and saying, we cannot have an arms control treaty with Russia that ignores China. If we limit ourselves to 1,500 warheads while China is sprinting toward 1,000, we are effectively putting ourselves at a disadvantage against a combined Russian-Chinese front. But China looks at the thousands of warheads the US and Russia still have in storage and says, why should we limit ourselves when we are still at a massive numerical disadvantage? It is a classic standoff where everyone has a logical reason to keep building, and no one has a reason to be the first to stop.
It really is. And while China is the big strategic challenge, North Korea has become a much more sophisticated technical challenge. We have been following the Hwasong program for years, but the Hwasong-19, which we saw tested recently, is a different beast entirely. It is now considered fully operational by most intelligence estimates. What makes it so dangerous compared to their earlier models like the Hwasong-15 is the shift to solid fuel technology.
Let us break that down for a second, because for the non-engineers listening, the difference between liquid and solid fuel is everything when it comes to a surprise launch, right?
Liquid-fueled missiles are like a science project gone wrong. They are corrosive, they are volatile, and you usually have to fuel them up right before you launch, which takes hours. During those hours, spy satellites can see the fueling trucks and the activity, giving the US a window to take the missile out on the pad. Solid fuel is more like a giant high-tech firework. It is stable, it can be stored inside the missile for years, and you can drive it out of a cave on a mobile launcher and fire it in minutes. The Hwasong-19 gives North Korea a prompt strike capability that is much harder for the United States to intercept or preempt. It means their deterrent is finally survivable.
It is a massive leap in a very short amount of time. And then you have the regional players who are right on the edge of that ICBM threshold. India is the perfect example. Their Agni 5 missile has a range of about 5,500 kilometers, which puts it right on the border of being an ICBM. But if you look at their strategy, it is clearly not aimed at the United States or Europe. It is aimed at China. It gives them the ability to reach any major city in China, including Beijing and Shanghai, from deep within Indian territory.
Right, it is a counterweight. India is not trying to be a global hegemon, they are trying to ensure their own regional security in a neighborhood that is becoming increasingly dominated by Chinese influence. They recently tested the Agni 5 with MIRV technology, which stands for Multiple Independently Targetable Reentry Vehicles. That means one missile can carry several warheads, each hitting a different city. That is a huge technical milestone that only the big players used to have. And this brings us to an interesting question about how we categorize these powers. We often hear the terms status quo powers versus revisionist powers. The United States, the UK, and France are usually put in the status quo category because they generally want to maintain the existing international order.
While Russia, China, and North Korea are labeled revisionist because they want to change that order, often through territorial expansion or by challenging the US-led alliance system. But I wonder, Herman, does that distinction actually hold up when you are talking about nuclear weapons? I mean, from a purely technical standpoint, a nuclear warhead does not care if the government that launched it is a democracy or an autocracy. The physical reality of the destruction is the same. Is there really such a thing as a responsible nuclear power? Or is that just a narrative we use to justify our own arsenals?
That is the big debate in international relations. The Western narrative is that our arsenals are transparent, they are subject to civilian oversight, and they are purely for deterrence. We say we do not use them for coercion. But if you are sitting in Moscow or Beijing, you see the U.S. modernization program, specifically the work on the Sentinel ICBM, also known as the LGM-35A, which is replacing the aging Minuteman III. You see that as a threat to your own security. You see the U.S. developing high-precision conventional weapons that could potentially take out your nuclear silos without even using a nuke. From their perspective, the U.S. is the revisionist power because it is trying to maintain global dominance through technological superiority.
We actually did a whole deep dive into the Minuteman III testing back in episode 1012, titled The Mach 24 Message. It is a fascinating piece of engineering, but it is also a reminder that even the established powers are constantly upgrading. It is not like we are just sitting on old technology from the 1960s. We are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to ensure our missiles are more accurate and more reliable. So, if everyone is modernizing and the treaties are gone, are we back to the logic of mutual assured destruction? Is MAD still the only thing keeping the peace in 2026?
It is the default setting, but it is becoming much more fragile. The old MAD paradigm relied on a relatively simple calculation between two players. If you hit me, I will hit you back, and we'd both die. But in a multipolar world, the math gets incredibly complicated. If a missile is launched from a submarine in the Pacific, how do you know for sure who sent it? Was it China? Was it North Korea? Was it a Russian sub? If China and Russia are both expanding, does the US need enough warheads to deter both of them simultaneously? That is the question that is driving the current arms race. The Pentagon is now openly discussing whether the US needs to increase its deployed warhead count for the first time since the Cold War ended.
It feels like we're in this vacuum now. Without New START, there is no on-site verification. There are no data exchanges where we tell each other exactly how many missiles are in which silos. We are back to relying almost entirely on national technical means, which is just a fancy way of saying spy satellites and signals intelligence. We covered the difficulty of verifying neutralization in episode 1017, and it is only getting harder as missiles become more mobile and decoys become more sophisticated. If you cannot verify what the other side has, you have to assume the worst-case scenario, and when you assume the worst, you build more.
It is a shell game, Korn. A very high-stakes shell game. And this leads us to the academic argument for minimum deterrence. There is a lot of research from groups like the Union of Concerned Scientists suggesting that you do not actually need thousands of warheads to prevent a nuclear war. Some experts argue that 100 or 200 warheads are more than enough to destroy any modern nation-state. If that is true, then why are we still maintaining thousands? Why is Russia still sitting on a massive stockpile of tactical and strategic nukes?
Well, I think a lot of it is about status signaling and margin of error. If you only have 100 warheads, and your adversary develops a really effective missile defense system, or they manage to take out half of your arsenal in a conventional strike, suddenly your deterrent is gone. Having thousands of warheads is about ensuring that even in the absolute worst-case scenario, after you have been hit by a surprise attack, you still have enough left over to finish the job. It is a grim logic, but it is the logic that has governed the nuclear age. It is also about prestige. In the world of geopolitics, numbers matter because they represent resolve and industrial capacity.
It is also about the psychology of power. If the United States were to unilaterally drop down to 200 warheads while China is sprinting toward 1,000, it would be seen by many allies in Japan, South Korea, and Europe as a massive retreat. It would signal that we are no longer willing or able to maintain the global balance of power. From a conservative strategic perspective, that kind of perceived weakness is often what leads to miscalculation and conflict. If an adversary thinks you are weak, they might try to seize territory, thinking you won't risk a nuclear response.
That is the real danger, isn't it? It is not necessarily that someone wakes up and decides to start a nuclear war. It is that someone miscalculates. They think they can push a little further in the South China Sea, or in Eastern Europe because they do not believe the other side has the stomach or the capability to respond. When you have a clear treaty framework like New START, the lines are easy to see. You know exactly what the other side has. When that framework is gone, the lines become blurry, and blurry lines are where wars start.
And that brings us to the future of arms control, or maybe the lack of it. People talk about no first-use pledges, where a country promises they will never be the first to use nuclear weapons in a conflict. China has had a formal no first-use policy for a long time, though many Western analysts are skeptical of it now that they are building so many silos. The United States has always resisted a no first-use pledge. Our policy is one of strategic ambiguity. We want our adversaries to be constantly wondering exactly where the red line is. We want them to fear that even a major conventional attack could be met with a nuclear response.
And from a strategic standpoint, that ambiguity has its own kind of deterrent value. If you know exactly what will trigger a nuclear response, you can operate right up to that line without fear. If you are not sure, you have to be much more cautious. But in this unconstrained era, I wonder if we are going to see a shift from arms control to what some people are calling arms management. Since we cannot agree on limits, maybe we can at least agree on how to talk to each other so we do not accidentally blow up the world.
I think that is exactly where we are headed. Arms control is about formal treaties, Senate ratifications, and binding limits. Arms management is more about communication, deconfliction hotlines, and maybe some informal agreements to avoid the most destabilizing behaviors, like testing missiles near each other's borders. It is a much more chaotic system, and it relies heavily on the hope that all the players are rational actors who want to avoid global catastrophe. But as we have seen, rationality is subjective.
That is a big assumption, Herman. We have seen in recent years that not every world leader operates under the same definition of rationality. Some might see nuclear brinkmanship as a perfectly valid tool for achieving regional goals. We have seen this with Russia's rhetoric regarding Ukraine, using their nuclear status as a shield to prevent the West from fully intervening, and we see it with North Korea's constant testing. They are using their ICBMs to carve out space for themselves and to ensure the survival of their regime.
That is the revisionist playbook. Use the nuclear shield to prevent the international community from intervening while you change the map. And without the New START framework, there is less pressure on these countries to even pretend they are interested in long-term stability. It is a very different world than the one our parents grew up in during the later stages of the Cold War. Back then, it was a two-player game. Now, it is a multiplayer game with high-speed technology and very little communication.
So, for the people listening who want to keep an eye on this, what should they be looking for? What are the indicators that things are moving in a dangerous direction versus just the usual posturing?
I would say keep a very close eye on two things. First, the development and deployment of hypersonic glide vehicles, or HGVs. These are weapons that travel at 5 times the speed of sound and can maneuver in the atmosphere, making them almost impossible for current missile defenses like the ground-based mid-course defense in Alaska to intercept. If we see a massive deployment of these by Russia or China, it could undermine the whole logic of second strike deterrence because they could potentially take out a command center before anyone even knows they are coming. Second, watch the space domain. If countries start testing anti-satellite weapons that could take out the early warning systems we rely on, that is a huge red flag that someone is preparing for a potential first strike.
It is amazing how much of this comes down to the same basic technologies we have been using for decades, but just refined to a terrifying degree. The rockets are faster, the sensors are better, but the human element, the decision-making process, is still as fallible as it ever was. I think that is the part that worries me the most. We are building these incredibly complex, incredibly fast systems, but we are still relying on the same old human brains to manage them. We are giving ourselves less and less time to decide whether a radar blip is a flock of birds or an incoming ICBM.
It really is a race between our technical capability and our diplomatic maturity. And right now, the technology is winning by a landslide. But it is not all doom and gloom. There are organizations like the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI, and the Federation of American Scientists who are doing incredible work tracking these developments. They use open source intelligence, commercial satellite imagery, and even social media posts to keep the public informed. This is more important now than ever because the official channels of information, the treaty-mandated data exchanges, are drying up.
Yeah, and for our listeners, I highly recommend checking out the SIPRI 2025 yearbook or looking at the nuclear notebooks from the Federation of American Scientists. They provide the hard data that cuts through a lot of the political noise. It is important to know the difference between a country testing a new missile and a country actually deploying a new capability. Specificity is the best antidote to panic.
When you hear a headline that says a country is expanding its arsenal, go look for the actual numbers. Is it 10 warheads or 200? Are they land-based or sea-based? Those details matter because they tell you what that country is actually afraid of. If they are building submarines, they are afraid of a first strike. If they are building highly accurate land-based missiles, they might be looking for a first strike capability themselves.
So, as we wrap up this part of the discussion, I keep coming back to this idea of the nuclear peace. For 50 years, we lived in a world where the two superpowers generally agreed on the rules of the road. We are now in the first unconstrained nuclear environment since 1972. It feels like we are walking into a dark room, and we do not know where the furniture is. We are feeling our way forward, hoping we do not trip over something that starts a fire.
That is a perfect analogy. The era of nuclear stability as we knew it is officially over. What comes next is still being written, and it is being written by countries like China, India, and North Korea, who were not part of the original Cold War agreements. They have very different visions for what the future should look like, and they are using ICBMs to make sure they have a seat at the table.
It is a lot to process, but I think it is important to face these realities head on. We cannot go back to the world of 1990 or even 2010. We have to deal with the world as it is in March of 2026, and that means understanding the technical realities of the ICBM landscape and the strategic motivations of the people who control them. It is not just about the missiles, it is about the intent behind them.
And I think we have covered a lot of ground today, from the technical specs of the Hwasong 19 to the philosophical debate over sufficiency versus superiority. It is a complex topic, but it is one that affects every single person on this planet. Nuclear weapons are the ultimate weird prompt because they are the one technology we built that we can never actually use without losing everything.
Well, Herman, you definitely did your homework on this one. I appreciate you diving into the research. It is a lot to take in, but I think it is essential for understanding where the world is headed. And I want to thank our housemate Daniel for sending in this prompt. It is definitely one of the more serious topics we've tackled, but it is one that has been on my mind a lot since the treaty expired last month.
Yeah, thanks Daniel. It is good to get these big questions out on the table. And to our listeners, if you have been following the show for a while, we really appreciate you being part of this journey. If you are enjoying these deep dives into the technical and the geopolitical, please consider leaving us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It really does help other people find the show, and it keeps us motivated to keep digging into these complex prompts.
It really does. And remember, you can find all of our past episodes, including the ones we mentioned today about the Minuteman III and nuclear verification, at myweirdprompts.com. We have an RSS feed there if you want to subscribe directly, and we also have a Telegram channel. Just search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram, and you will get a notification every time a new episode drops.
We have over 1,100 episodes in the archive now, so there is plenty of material to explore if you want to go deeper into the history of arms control or the physics of ballistic missiles. It is all there, from the early V-2 rockets to the latest hypersonic glide vehicles.
All right, I think that is a good place to leave it for today. This has been a heavy one, but an important one. We will be back soon with another prompt and another deep dive into the things that make this world so fascinating and, occasionally, a little bit terrifying.
Until next time, stay curious and keep asking the hard questions. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We will talk to you soon.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow